Hello, welcome back to my channel, a place where you can let go of your stress while listening to stories found on the internet, or not. You can call me DW, for those who didn't know. So just grab your favorite drink, sit back, and relax. Well now, let's start by turning down the background music, shall we? This is part 3 of a 7-part story, so if you haven't finished the previous stories, it is highly recommended to do so. I'm going to leave a link in the description, so find it there, okay? I got you covered. So, shall we start? Part 3, The Talk. For dinner, we had salad. Perhaps Frank McKinley was a decidedly healthy eater. He was old after all, and it was about time he had begun to take care of himself. Or perhaps he knew of the widespread rumors that reached the public after he allegedly murdered his wife and child. That, well, he ate them. I'm going to pretend it was the former. Rufus gave us our salads, our bread, and our wine, all with the air of someone who thought what he was doing was far beneath him. The man had a knack for non-verbal communication. "This looks delicious, Frank. Thank you," Dr. Reed said politely, earning a smile from the old man. "Yes, delicious," Sasha echoed to his left. I, not wanting to parrot off the same sentiments of gratitude as the others, remained in awkward silence. Frank, with yet more surprising dexterity, picked up his fork and agilely stepped a few pieces of green. "Bon appetit," he said, before crunching down on the leaves. The rest of us followed suit. Besides some initial light chatter and niceties, it wasn't long before Frank got, pardon the pun, to the meat of the discussion. "Dr. Reid," he started, and the woman looked up. "Sasha?" He caught the other man's attention as well. "I'd like to talk to you both about something important. Something that I think the two of you, great minds as you are, could help me understand." "Of course," Dr. Reid replied, her eyebrows slightly constricted with concerned curiosity. "Yes, of course," Sasha echoed, putting down the large piece of baguette he had been gnawing on. "I'd like to talk to the two of you about death." At this, Dr. Reid said nothing, and I assumed, therefore, Sasha also had nothing to say. Frank chuckled at their silence. I know. It's a difficult subject for some, and I especially may be someone you'd be hesitant to discuss these things with. But, as you know, I was never convicted of anything. I remain to this day as innocent as I was almost 40 years ago. "Of course, you don't have to defend yourself to us," Dr. Reid said, putting her fork completely down and actually reaching her hand out to place on Frank's withered one. Sasha nodded adamantly, forgetting once again the blindness of his host. "What would you like to know?" Sasha asked. Whatever Frank was going to answer with was briefly interrupted by yet another entrance made by Rufus. He was carrying a platter, but this time not of food. Instead, he had a large 1970s style telephone. He placed it on a stand, similar to a waiter delivering plates in a restaurant, directly to the right of Frank. Then he left the room. "Oh, excuse me, I don't mean to be rude," Frank said amiably. I'm expecting a rather important phone call." No one said anything at this. "Now," he started again, "Dr. Reid, tell me about how ancient Egyptians viewed the afterlife." Dr. Reid laughed, somewhat nervously. "Where to begin?" she said. "Well, unlike much of modern religions, ancient Egyptians didn't believe in the simple division of a person into a soul and a body." She started, her voice growing more animated as she explored the topic she obviously knew so well. A person was made up of many parts: their mind, their body, their spirit, even their name. Each have their own place in the afterlife. Frank nodded with that same small smile. I myself was interested and started jotting down the basis of the conversation on the notepad I had discreetly pulled out of my camera bag. "And the shut?" The last word was strange, not one that I recognized. It wasn't English, that was for sure, but it was definitely one that Dr. Reid knew. She laughed nervously. "Yes, the shut, the shadow. It was believed that this was a part of a person that wasn't bound to the grave. Essentially, it could go where it wanted, almost like a ghost." Frank nodded once more, but the smile that had been so permanent on his face for the majority of the evening had faltered slightly. I could have sworn he turned his head slightly towards the table, to his right, as though he thought he heard a ring. And how did they feel about this ghost? Dr. Reid laughed nervously again. "Well, not good, in short. It meant that there was something wrong in the universe. Some sort of balance needed to be restored. Time, space, the laws of nature, everything was put into jeopardy with the appearance of a ghost. Something from the past appearing in the present. Something here and not generally. It meant something was very wrong." Frank, satisfied, turned to his left. "And Sasha?" he said, and I felt Dr. Reid relax slightly beside me as the bearded man perked up. "One of Greeks?" "Well, I'm afraid it's rather bleak," he said, shaking his head. "Everyone went to Hades, good and bad, kings and murderers. Just one big boring afterlife," he chuckled. "Yes, a very interesting discussion that will make," Frank said quietly. "But it's philosophy I'm interested in this evening." Sasha looked slightly confused. "I'm so sorry, sir. I assumed you said you wanted to know about death." "Tell me about Tegan." Sasha smiled a bit, looking as though he was glad to be back to a less creepy area of discussion. "Yes, Tegan and episteme. Doing and knowing. You know your stuff." Frank's smile lasted only a fraction of a second at this. "Dr. Bezarov, you are a professor, are you not? A bit more literal definition, if you could." Sasha frowned slightly, and I myself was slightly taken aback at the boldness of the frail old man. To make something visible so that it can be known, that's the specifics of it. If truth was hidden, it was invisible. In order for something to be known, it had to be true. And in order for it to be true, it had to be seen. Like a philosophical overly complex, seeing is believing. It's where we get our word for technology. True can be made visible through humanity doing something, usually making some sort of tool, whether it be as simple as a hammer or as complex as... computer?" I interjected suddenly, turning a bit red as the three people in the room turned their attention towards me. I had forgotten, it seemed, that I was there to record and nothing more. Sasha nodded at me, then looked back to Frank. "Yes, like a computer. Things that are unknown, things that are mysterious. Technology can bridge the gap between us and them." Frank was silent for a moment, his face contemplative. "To see is to know," he said mysteriously. No one responded, as it sounded quite rhetorical. "If that were true, how am I to know anything?" he questioned with a chuckle, waving his hand in front of his opaque eyes. "It's not to be taken literally," Sasha said quickly, obviously afraid he had offended his host. "It's a general term for the act of creating in order to—" "I am not a stupid man, Sasha." "No, of course not. I've called you here for a reason," Frank said forcefully. "All of you," he emphasized, and an uncomfortable feeling crept up my spine as, once again, I had the unmistakable feeling that he was looking directly at me. He leaned back, slightly in his chair. "I have a problem." It was silent. I was vaguely aware that at some point Rufus had to appear in the doorway once more, watching, but my attention was elsewhere. "What is it?" Dr. Reid asked, leaning apprehensively towards Frank. "You all have had such open minds to respond to my invitation," Frank said in a voice surprisingly gentle, "and I hope that openness remains when you hear what I say next." He adjusted in his chair slightly before speaking. "I've been talking for some time now to a ghost on the telephone." For a moment, no one said anything. Then, just as I did, the other two guests' eyes turned to the telephone that was waiting next to Frank. The dark shadow of Rufus, now a mere afterthought, showed no sign of surprise in the doorway. "What?" Dr. Reid had finally broken the silence with what sounded like the start of a question, but she was interrupted. Frank had held up one finger in her direction, asking her to wait. The phone, you see, had begun to ring. Next time, the call. Okay, that's the end of part 3. Well, what do you think? Is the story good? Let me know in the comment section down below, and please subscribe if you haven't yet. We'll see you again next time. Sweet dreams.